Welcome to the Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others. The helping conversation is at the core of the sacred partnership between two people when one is there to help the other. Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Studios, Rochester, New York. Find your voice and broadcast it to the world at RockVox, rockvox.com. And now your host of the Helping Conversation, Keith Greer.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Helping Conversation. Today we continue our exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation. And with that said, let me introduce my guest today, Mike Mandina. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
So let me fill you all in a little bit on who Mike is. Mike is chairman and past president of Optimax Systems Incorporated, an optical components manufacturer located in our area, in the Rochester area in Ontario, New York. Optimax was founded in 1991 in the basement of a barn. There's a story there. Today, the company has more than 350 teammates, more than 300 who are highly skilled technicians, engineers, and scientists. A master optician himself, Mike has received numerous honors and awards over the years for his leadership and industry success. Currently, Mike is an active member in many industry associations and organizations and was one of the founders of the Finger Lakes Advanced Manufacturers Enterprise, founding director of Business Leaders United, committed to workforce training, federal policy, and president of American Precision Optics Manufacturers Association. Through involvement with these organizations, Mike is committed to addressing the current skills gap and aligning the educational system with industry needs to produce a skilled workforce, to strengthen our region by helping to ensure a vibrant high-tech manufacturing community. An advocate for self-managed organizational structures that enable individual workers maximum control and ownership of their work domain. Mike holds associate degrees in optical engineering technology and engineering science from Monroe Community College, a bachelor's degree in applied physics from Empire State College, as well as an Executive MBA from the Rochester Institute of Technology. And again, Mike, thank you so much for being here. And in that bio, there are a bazillion different places where I could ask you about how you do your helping conversation with individuals and organizations. But let's start at the beginning. So you have that story of a huge multi-million-dollar company that started in a barn. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you can't always control what happens to you in life. And the opportunity for me to become involved in Optimax in the very earliest stages came about because I was fired from my employer for an economic downturn. Didn't like how I was managing the business, and I was made redundant. And so I was walking around looking for an opportunity, and there was a couple guys that were starting to put something together, making optics in a barn in Webster. So that's how I was available and looking. Otherwise, I would have just stayed my nose to the grindstone at my past employer and just got beat up every day and just tried to do the best I could while not being fully appreciated. You can always say I could have done the job better, but I couldn't have tried any harder. Right. But this, you don't know what things come together to give you the opportunities, and what seems like a real sorrowful place to be turns into a really wonderful opportunity.
Right. So when you decided to take on this position with what was the beginning of what is now Optimax, as you said, you worked for a pretty significant employer in our area, and had done your thing as somebody else's employee. Did you go in with a vision that this would be a direction that was much more entrepreneurial?
I think what I wanted in whatever I was going to become associated with was a lot of transparency and visibility about the business. I wanted anyone who was engaged in it to, if not have personal financial ownership in it, have emotional ownership in it.
Right.
And was very keen on having sharing of the profits of the firm with whoever worked in it. And so, Optimax to this day offers 25% of the monthly profits are divvied out to the workforce in the first week of each month. And we've done that for almost the entire time the company's been incorporated. But it's been, more than 25, 26 years that we've been using that model. And it helps create the engagement by the workforce.
Right. Right. So I'm assuming the person you work for, the company you work for before you came to Optimax, was the one who every year on a certain day of the year gave out a big bonus.
No, it wasn't. You're speaking of Kodak.
Yeah.
And I interviewed at Kodak and Xerox when I was getting my associate's degree in optics technology, engineering technology at MCC. And one, I actually couldn't get an interview. They wouldn't even give me an interview. And the other one, my interview lasted about 30 seconds. And so I was not, whatever they were looking for, I was not it.
You were not it.
So I ended up working for smaller optics manufacturing companies. Actually, I worked for one, and then started a company with a partner when I was like 23.
Right.
And back in the early days. So I basically been working for myself, although we did sell that company, and that's the company that ended up firing me was the one I actually started. So that was kind of difficult to take.
I'll bet.
Yeah, but
so I'm thinking from a helping conversation standpoint within the world of how a company shares its financial gains with its employees. That was you were somewhat ahead of your time 20 some odd years ago to from the very beginning say we're going to have a financial structure here where everybody who is employed benefits from all of us working hard.
Yeah, I often think about that. And part of this has to do, which I consider myself to be a terrible traditional manager. I mean, so I read a book called Managing by Howard Janine, who was a by the numbers ITT back in the days, and he just his ability to hold people accountable in these big forums and their performances and really very cutthroat and bottom line driven and everything. And I'm just not wired that way. And so I read this and I'm trying to emulate that, and it was oil and water in terms of what I felt I should be doing and what I was doing. And, so I was in conflict for decades in terms of how I thought and how I was taught and told you should be managing versus how I wanted to manage. And at some point, I decided, and with my partners and other people I worked with, to manage differently.
Right, right. I tell this story all the time about when many, many years ago when I was training as a family therapist. There was a very, very, very well-known family therapist by the name of Carl Whitaker. He's considered kind of one of the gods of the whole movement of family therapy. I was determined I was going to be the next Carl Whitaker because when you watched videos of him or read books about him, what he was able to do was astounding, and had some very painful experiences that told me, nah, got to find my way to do this. Yeah.
It's true. So in building companies are small societies.
Yeah.
So you're really building a society, and you're establishing a culture which belongs to the organization that you're a part of and helping to build. And that's part of what I learned. And your culture can be different than other people's cultures.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. And so I'm hearing you say that a very significant component of this society or culture is authenticity. Is that you as the person who is leading it, you have to find out your way of doing this that feels absolutely real to you in your bones.
Yeah. And when people come along with you, they're coming along with you mostly because they want you to be successful. They may not necessarily agree with you, but they're entitled to their disagreement, and you can have those conversations, but they understand that this is what's got to be done, it gets done.
Right.
And so to have that openness and ability to disagree but still give good effort, even though there's a disagreement about how to go about doing something, is very powerful. And doing it in a way that you don't have people shutting down or not working to their full potential, and basically sabotaging the effort that you're really undertaking in a way that they may not even be conscious of. And so to get people that want to work together and want their coworker to be successful is a difficult challenge because it doesn't permeate itself everywhere in society.
No. And going back to something you said a few minutes ago, I think within the traditional organizational world, that's not how leadership has been framed, to invite everybody to render their opinion, even though maybe at the end of the day someone has to make the final call. You're still getting to take advantage of everybody's brilliance.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was taught in business was that you hire a person to do a job, and that's the focus when they walk, and they leave the rest of themselves at the door when they walk into the factory or whatever the workplace is, and they're part of the machine that is the business that they're operating in. At Optimax, we got to a point where we said, look, we're hiring the whole person.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
And so we understand that people go through different things in there, and since we have many employees that are 20+ year employees,
right?
And we've seen cycles. I personally, and every one of us has gone through cycles where it was all about work, and then times it was all about some catastrophe at home or some other thing going on. And you have to be soft and resilient and absorb what that's all about. And knowing that you get to the other side and you're still going to have this high performance and great employee in person. And because, people go through divorce, death, sicknesses, it impacts their daily lives, and they can't leave that at the door.
Yeah, and vice versa, right? That if there's some stresses at work, to think that that's not going to go home with you. Yeah. I love hearing that because I do this. I have this talk that I do on how to create safety and trust, especially in the workplace. And one of the things I talk about is I call it a couple of false workplace narratives, and one of them is that every employee is supposed to leave their outside stuff at the door. Right. That's never happened, right? We kind of didn't talk about it because everyone said you're supposed to, but that's absolutely impossible for us as human beings. Right. So what another wonderful way to think about how you have helped your employees and your organization by giving a clear message. No, we hire you, we hire everything you come with, we hire your family, everything that walks in the door with you.
We get criticized for hanging on to employees too long because if someone's struggling or not performing well, we attempt to bend over backwards to counsel. You became involved with Optimax for that reason. We have numerous counselors and people we bring in, and we make sure that if this employee's giving them every opportunity to straighten their ship or give them the time, whatever the time off, whatever they need at that point in their lives to deal with what they need to deal with if it's that catastrophic and that dominating in terms of what they can do at work. Again, it's a lot of their peer support group is at work.
Right.
It's a society, and so we want to treat each other with love and respect. And we think as a company, if you do that kind of thing, what we found is that it actually it enhances the bottom line.
Right,
you actually make more money.
Yeah.
So it's kind of dumb. You stop looking away from making money and you start looking about caring for people and satisfying customers and make sure your people are happy, and that if there's issues, you help them with it. And then when you turn around, you say, wow, how come my checking account's getting larger? We have found that is has been the outcome. So that's why we can have 350 plus employees in have increased sales and stuff because our people make that happen.
Right, right. So I'm always curious with folks about whether there, as you look back, maybe middle school, high school, were there any indicators back then, as you look back, that you were going to be as entrepreneurial as you have been in your adult professional world?
The main thing I think back of is I was in scouting, Boy Scouts, and my father was the scoutmaster, and he was a manager at Stromberg Carlson, and he did nothing at the scout meetings. I mean, when we got into Boy Scouts, it was me and a couple other senior guys. You're 11 years old and at the time, and we planned the meetings. We put on the whatever activities. We did a lot of campouts. We camp out once a month, and I just think that you just learned that it was your responsibility to do stuff and to make it interesting and to recruit new kids, and so I think that was probably I look back on those times and all the stuff that I did, as a young kid, thinking that I was supposed to do that. So I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that because that's just how it was.
Yeah.
And where I look at today and basically how I raised my kids, how my kids raised their kids, the coddling and the just kind of doing stuff. I mean, I was as guilty as any parent in terms of maybe not challenging my kids to do that kind of stuff. My dad was pretty hands off, and it was if we'd had a bad meeting or a bad camp out, it
was on you.
It wasn't his fault.
Yeah. Right. He's not the one who came up with the plan. Yeah. So you a few minutes ago you mentioned one of the books that you have read, and I know that's kind of one of the pieces of Mike Mandina's reputation is he almost always has a book in his hand that he is reading about how to do what he does better. So who have been maybe a couple of either your mentors or authors or other leaders that have really impacted how you think about what you do?
Well, from a straight-up business perspective on how to run a business, understand your markets, and how to offer value, Michael Porter is awesome. I mean, I think his stuff is timeless, and that's really about markets and who has power in a market space and offer product offerings. In terms of the in Toyota production methods, I mean, we spent a lot of time with Toyota, which is really about team building. It is about empowering people to do work and in simple cues and communications. And then Frederick Laloux was probably in the last 8 years, I'll call it. Frederick Laloux wrote Reinventing Organizations, and that's really about self-management and trying to minimize the number of high-level managers engaged in the process. How much of that authority and power can you put down to the actual people doing the work?
Right.
And Zappos, the shoe supplier, there's a book called Holacracy. I forgot the author of Holacracy, but the model there is Zappos implemented that, where they basically got rid of all the managers. Then they brought back kind of a similar, a little bit of management in there, but a fairly highly empowered organization. So there's something in that in terms of self-management, getting rid of the autocratic, dictatorial parent-child relationship in business and make it an adult relationship is very, very powerful if you can do it. It's kind of difficult, and it takes strong leadership, and it takes people who are willing to sacrifice their ego in high-level positions, which is hard to find. How powerful people that will put their ego in check and allow other people to rise up. It's not easy.
Right. So, and I've had the privilege with your organization to be a little bit a part of some of these conversations. So in your role as president, in bringing in what has always struck me is a radically different way of viewing how an organization should work from how most of us have been raised to think in terms of the traditional hierarchy. What has been your role, and how do you do it in your communication, not only with the leaders, but with everyone within Optimax, in helping them starting to wrap their head around this very different way of looking at how an organization can work?
You know, that's really, it's almost like by doing nothing. It's you end up, I think one of the things that we talk about, my partner and I, is that I have a propensity to say yes. So if somebody comes with an idea and they want to try something, the answer, yeah. You know, so we don't ask 16,000 questions about it exactly. And then let me talk about what we used to do, which was awful. What we used to do is have someone would come up with an idea, and if we did say yes, then once it was executed, we would just criticize the hell out of it.
Yeah.
And say all the things that weren't as we would have done it, or it wouldn't have been perfect. I mean, it was, so if you have, if that's your behavior, people aren't going to want to come to you with ideas, and if they do, they're certainly not going to want to try to execute on them, because if they do, they're just going to get criticized no matter how well they perform. And we did this. I'm so embarrassed about the level of that type of angst and really negative pressure we put on people to do that. And I see, because I was part of it too.
Right.
And then, I don't know, somewhere along the line, waking up and just say, just tell these people yes, and just give them a pat on the back for no matter what the outcome is. And if you got a lot of people encouraged to want to do stuff, and they feel that they're going to feel it's going to be a good feeling more often than not, then they're going to do stuff, and they're going to try things, and they're going to have successes, and they're going to learn from those successes and failures, and they're going to be better next time.
Right. And
if you've got an organization of people like that, how does anybody compete with that? You can't compete with that.
Right.
And so that was part of the, I think, the learning over time of making enough mistakes and doing a lot of stupid things. You say, well, that's not smart. Let's try something different here.
Was there an aha moment, or was this something that just kind of morphed over time of evaluating this kind of old way of doing things?
I can't point to an aha.
Yeah.
I really can't. I think in some parts of the business, we've always had this encouragement going on, but then there'd be other parts or other avenues where we'd put the clamps down. So I think we were very discombobulated, very confused as an organization.
Yeah.
So we had this kind of loving bonus approach, but then we had this autocratic, that's a dumb idea approach, and I think most businesses do that today. Yeah. And that's part of the struggle, and that's why there's all the water cooler talk. That's why most of your energy goes into dealing with the issues about the humans that you hire, and not so much about shipping product and the stuff that actually generates the money. Right.
It also strikes me with this kind of perspective of knowing, I can walk into Mike's office and I'm going to go for it. Is not only will it produce success and produce innovation, which is so key in your industry, but it takes away. I'm in a conversation all the time with different folks I work with within organizations of the fear of, if I fail, I'll be judged. Not the thing I attempted to do be judged. I will be judged. And so to take that off the table, that I might try an idea and it will prove that it doesn't work. Okay, next. You just move on to next, and nobody is judging me personally.
Yeah, I mean, so part of this idea, if you do come with an idea, we have a process, and this is kind of out of holacracy, and it's called the advice process. Now, we haven't fully formalized it that much at Optimax, but we talk about it all the time for years now. And so in the advice process is simply whatever your idea is and whatever you want to try, whoever it affects, you should talk to them and get their inputs. And so it's not okay to just go and make some change that affects, 80% of the effect is on these other people over there that you didn't engage in the conversation and the decision process. Right. That is not okay. But it's if you do that and you engage them, and you should be sensing whether it's appropriate to do or not.
Right.
And so and we want people to go out, but you got to have these conversations, and you can't go to somebody and have them shut you down because they don't like you, which happens a lot.
Right.
It's really about what is attempting to be done.
Right.
And about the issue that's being worked on. It's not about the person. And so to kind of shift that conversation, and by the way, and if people are open and honest with each other, chances are that they're going to kind of like each other enough to have these conversations.
Right.
And so, again, I'm back to this society, this culture. If you don't have that, if everyone's covering their ass, if everyone's at odds with each other, and they're all trying to pick each other apart, if that's your culture in society, in your organization, you can't do self-management. No. You just cannot do it.
Right.
And so it's nurturing this kind of culture allows these
right.
other things to happen.
So I'm curious about your take as of today on where Optimax is at with self-management. So the first question would be this what did you just call it? Where everybody goes and asks everybody
the advice process.
The advice process. So that alone is a pretty phenomenal shift in organizational structure and thinking and procedure for most folks. So what's been your experience so far with your folks engaging in that?
I think it's this is a long process, and so the people who have the most power and authority, I see them giving off some of that power and authority to people who technically report to them, and then allow those people to do things, and then and they give a long leeway in terms of the types of decisions, the amount of money they can commit to things, and other resources. They've got quite a large domain of authority and power to do things. So it's one thing to actually have responsibility for something. It's another thing to actually have the power and authority to do it.
Right.
And so we talk a lot, and I think we execute a lot on actually doing both. That is, if someone has a role and a responsibility, that they actually have the authority to do the things they need to do to sufficiently carry that role out. And it's not perfect everywhere. Oh, by the way, this whole thing is imperfect, and it's also, you feel completely out of control when
right.
I think when it's working at its best, there's no one person in that company that has a clue as to what is actually going on, because it's going on in so many places. It's much more biologic. It is not top centric down,
right.
and none of it is wired into a complete ecosystem, or it's more like an electrical system. It operates like an ecosystem where things are just happening. And so for people who are control freaks and need to know everything and need to give approval, this is not for them.
Right.
This will drive them insane.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, so that I agree. And so I've always wanted to ask you this, because I wonder about the other end. If in some of the conversations I've been in with folks who are not high up the traditional hierarchy chart, it seems that self-led teams would be something we have been screaming for our entire lives, because we all like to complain about hierarchy. Mm-hmm. You then take hierarchy away, and I see a whole lot of anxiety about, wait, now I'm responsible?
Yeah. Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, so people complain about, it's really comfortable for all humans
no question.
To complain about some power that is screwing things up, and they don't understand it. They're so stupid. And then when you take that away and you say, well, here you go, here's the power, and they don't want to pick it up.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people will not pick it up. But so even those that don't want to pick it up now understand that they have the ability and the authority to pick it up if they want to.
Right. And
the fact that they choose not to causes them to be much more compliant and helpful with those that do.
Right.
Because they have much greater respect for it.
Right.
And so, because they're not being told, no, you can't do that. They're being saying, yeah, you can do that. And why don't you? And they go like, I don't want to.
Right.
So now they're empowered to do it or not. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. And some people have to leave the company because they cannot deal with their own inability to be responsible. They want to blame somebody else.
Right.
and they're so big on placing blame that it's the most important thing.
Right.
And it's
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask that maybe you could just bring clarity to, because this is another thing that I know I hear around the whole concept of self-led teams, or TEAL it's sometimes called, is doesn't this just result in like nobody's making decisions?
It can. Yeah, it can spiral, and that's part of the problem of that. So where do you have authority for somebody to make a decision versus everybody, saying "Kumbaya" together and trying to come? This is not about, and so what's important in this type of self-managed thing, it is not about consensus. You actually have people in roles that have authority and power to make decisions, and they own that power and that authority.
Okay.
And they have to just be sure that they use the advice process when they exercise it. And so somewhere along the line, and this is a kind of a mystery how this kind of happens, is that people find these roles and certain people have these authorities and responsibilities. Now at Optimax, we've done various things to identify clarity around some of these roles, and it's foggy as hell on others.
Right.
And this is very unsettling for the organization because you want some clarity about it. And so some of the stuff is squishy and unsatisfying from that perspective, but some of it is really clear. And so the longer we're attempting to do the self-managed, whatever our version of it is going to be, which I'm sure will be different than any other company that's out there, because this is not a cookie cutter type of solution for people and organizations. I think we'll find we'll evolve things that work best.
Right.
Trial and error, and we'll find out who should be in what role, how much authority and domain and power should they really have, how aggressive does the advice process have to be, and when there is conflicts, what are the ways that we best deal with these conflicts, and who are the best people to mediate, and these types of things have to be worked out. Now, as it turns out, the people who are currently leaders and managers oftentimes are very important in these roles, and you find out their leaders rise no matter where they are, and so you're going to find still people will have authority and control, and people will go to them and ask questions, and look to them, and because leadership just rides up, but it's not because so much about a title now in the corner office. It's about because they're the people trust, and they know they have the best view on giving the right answer. And so why you're going to this person is different than if you're in one of the traditional autocratic hierarchical organization.
Right. Anything in the research around self-led teams that, and I'm sure under best of circumstances, this would be major ballpark estimate. When you take an organization that has a history of running like a pretty traditional hierarchical organization, who one day says, we want to move towards this, how long that process is?
Yeah, I mean, in Frederick Laloux's book, he's got anecdotal stories about companies and how long it's taken and how they've gone about it. But I think in terms of real data and research, there's more of it now, but it's hard to find, and because it's relatively new, and to actually do a study on this is difficult. But I'm sure there's more information than I am aware of, just because I just kind of took this and started running, and I did a little bit of, I've been reading articles from time to time, but not so much in the last year or so.
Yeah. So one of the things that strikes me about all of this is that this move for your organization, and you've already said it, from top of leadership all the way through, creates a level of uncertainty and a level of anxiety of not knowing what it's going to look like down the road for Optimax. And so for me, I immediately jumped to, boy, that really puts a premium on everybody in the organization really attending to how they create trust and safety and inclusion in their helping conversations with each other. So as you think about how you've done your leadership over the years with a focus on creating trust and safety within your relationships with your colleagues and employees, how do you make that happen?
Well, I think part of it is modeling the way, and so you model as best you can. And I don't always model perfectly, and I think part of my role now is has been referred to as holding the space.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Right.
so create the space so that people can make decisions and do things and feel safety in that space.
Right.
And so if I'm not doing that, or someone else at Optimax, in terms of the perceived as a senior manager level, isn't allowing this space for people to do the kinds of things that are part of a self-managed organization, then it starts to go away.
Right.
And then you fall back into the hierarchical, traditional, us versus them mentality. And to be clear, we fight this. Optimax fights this battle every day. Okay, and we have managers still. We have manager titles. So we've got this hybrid thing going on, and we're finding places where we can really employ the self-management. We're finding places where, geez, this doesn't really seem to work that well,
Right.
and or that group of people or those individuals aren't wired in a way that they know how to work with self-management. So you find pockets of real awesome self-management techniques going on, and pockets of somewhat micro-autocratic
Right.
going in. And so,
Right.
and these are things are working side by side within Optimax and doing, and sometimes the autocratic actually is better. When things got to happen fast,
They just do.
You
Right.
just got, and you need a commander in chief just firing away. Then if that person just fires away orders, people execute, and you get after it. There's times when that's got to happen.
Right.
And so knowing when those times are and when it's appropriate is part of the mystery and the uncertainty about the prescription of how this works.
Right. 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 So one of the aspects that I always think about in doing a really effective helping conversation with folks is that there's an aspect of the conversation that's strength-based. And you've talked about that just even in inviting anybody to come in and say, I've got an idea, and you saying, run with it. Right? That's a really strength-based perspective, really treats people as the true resource in their own lives. So I always like asking my guests, as you think about the work you've done and how you engage people in the conversations, what are some of your strengths, positive characteristics, positive attributes that you believe have worked for you in leading this company?
I would think that I think I do relatively high in emotional intelligence. And that's probably about it. Because I got some engineering degrees in working as a technician, and I can do that stuff, and I can do accounting, and I can do it, but I bloody hate it. And it's not where my natural inclinations are. And so, I have done engineering drawings. I've mastered opticians. I make very precision parts. I've run intricate machines and done layouts, and so I'm capable of doing it. But I have to say, I am not world class in any of those things.
Right.
And I could try as hard as I might and dedicate myself to them, and I would never be world class in it. It's just not. I'm not wired that way.
Right. Right.
So, but I am wired, I think, in a way to have a sense and a feeling for people and emotion, even though
Yes.
maybe sometimes I don't always demonstrate it. I always feel it.
Right.
And when I have power and authority, and I can actually make things better for people, I want to exercise that, because we've all been in situations where we didn't have the power and authority, and you wanted to help somebody, but it was beyond your control. And actually, in the position that I'm in and with Optimax, man, I can actually do that. And with my partners, we can do that. Right. And that's what we tried to do. And we've feeling good about what's gone on the last 10 years or so in terms of our ability to really figure out how to maybe make it so that the organization and the society we're creating is people feel good about being in it. They don't hate coming to work every day.
Right. Look, just even using that word, Mike, I don't know how many organizational leaders or people who have built a company would use the term society. That under our roof is a society. It's not a job. It's not even a company. It's a society. That's to me a very emotionally and relationally aware word to use to describe what is truly going on. And oh yes, by the way, at the end of the day, we get optics parts out the door. So I'm curious on the other end, maybe over the years, what would you say have been one or two of the biggest challenges, either personally or professionally to you, in leading this organization?
I think there's times when if like right now with COVID, and then there's times when it's just talk in terms of affecting people's lives. When there is the telecom bust that occurred, where we went into the Great Recession, and those were times when I think we had about 150 employees or so at that time, and the decision about and the orders just fell away, cancellations. I mean, and we were somewhat of a highly leveraged company. We didn't, Optimax, to be clear, didn't start with any deep pockets. This has all been built up and generated just from the sweat of the people that have worked there over the years and just building it up a little bit at $1 at a time. And so when that hit, that was one of those check times. And my partners, and we decided to not lay anybody off. We decided to, there was a few people, but those were the people that were basically on the edge of being fired. And so you kind of like escalate the process a little bit, but there was just 2 or 3 out of 150. And we did a payroll reduction for everyone. We took the biggest hit, and we just told the people we were going to ride it through together. And we did shared work. We did all we could to make sure people were getting a reasonable income going on, that they still had access to work, that we still were, having the machines running, and we were, taking jobs in at almost no margin or losses, even just to keep things going. And when we came out of that, most of our competitors had laid people off. They did all the things that you do in a traditional business. And when the recession started to come out, we had our full workforce. They were hungry as hell to perform. We just had orders coming in, with profitability, and we just shot up, and we never looked back from that time.
Right.
And so that was one of those defining moments about how do you treat people that depend on you. And one of the things when I was a kid, I asked my grandfather, who was he didn't hardly say anything. I got 5 minutes of dialogue with this guy for all the time. He lived next door to me, and but for some reason I was asking about the Great Depression. I think it was a school assignment, and and everyone at Optimax has heard this story, and he man a few words, and I said, "Gramps, what about the Great Depression?" I said, "How did that work? And how terrible was it?" And he says, "It wasn't a depression if you had a job." And that for him, that was all he had to say about the depression.
Right.
And so my grandfather had a job. He was a tailor.
Right.
Okay, Italian tailor. And so he apparently kept making clothes and sewing, and he had a job during the Depression. And but those that didn't got in the food lines and all the other stuff.
Right.
So when we had the Great Recession in the company meeting, told the story, taught people about it. And so that was our commitment to keep people working, make sure they had a job. And that is, and even today, we will tell if with COVID, whatever the calamity is going to be, that's how we want to address it. And that's part of the safety to let people know that, if they're working at Optimax now, they'll be working at them tomorrow, even if we're having a calamity.
And I can tell you, as someone who has interacted with a good number of your employees, and many of whom were around at that time, that's remembered. Yeah. It's remembered and it's appreciated, and it's a part of the narrative that some of your employees speak about why it's different working at Optimax. Yeah, I've heard that numerous times. Yeah.
So, and in the end, when you look from a competitor, I wouldn't want to compete with Optimax. If I'm a competitor, I'm kind of scared because we have a very resilient, robust workforce that can take a pounding, and they'll come back. Yeah. And they'll come back in a way that it's they'll even stronger and better than what they were before. And we've done it several times now over the history of the company, and we think we got a formula that works, and it's a hard formula. You have to have a lot of ducks in line for this formula to be able to execute on it properly. Right. And so, and we've been, doing that for decades now in terms of making sure that we've got our ducks lined up in a way that makes us robust.
Yeah. So I just want to keep track of time because we're heading down the home stretch here, but I don't want to end without asking you about another place where you are engaged in another level of helping conversation, and that's workforce development. So talk even just a little bit about that, of what's going on there and your vision for what the level of training is that the next generation of workforce is going to need.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things as Optimax has grown, and these are technical. Most of the jobs are technical. We have support activities, but by and large, the jobs are technical. And these are people that work with their minds and their hands. And it's kind of a craft. I mean, we've got, even at the engineering level, I mean, there's parts of it that are, just straight up engineering, but optics and waves of light and the sensitivities of the products and the materials we use, you got to have a craft. I mean, somewhere between 5 to 20 people handle every optic that goes through Optimax, and any one of them could put a scratch on it or chip it or cause a defect on it, and it's sensitive to different chemicals, there's different handling protocols, and so people have to care all the way through the process. So getting the folks to be trained to care about their work, so it's in working in teams, and then also have the technical background and credentialing to allow them to basically operate computer systems, but you're also doing grinding removal, and you're doing 3D additive manufacturing techniques and reading drawings and interacting with computer control systems. You can do some of it at work, but if they're not coming with a foundation of computer literacy, how to organize, how to do project management at some level, and it's the amount of work that it takes to get somebody up to that speed is daunting for an employer. So to get these school systems, even at the grammar school, high school levels, to work on, STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and art, frankly, the STEAM approach, and then to be able to work in teams and have that part of how folks are being trained, youngsters are being trained as they come up into the workforce. And then actually having some technical skills that can be leveraged. And, years ago, when my kids were in school, they shut down a lot of the shop classes, all these applied practical stuff, because the U.S. was supposed to be a service society and we weren't going to make things anymore. And that was actually talked about. And, of course, what you find is that if you don't make things here, then the engineering and the other stuff goes wherever that stuff's being made too. So then you have a bunch of lawyers and accountants left here, and that doesn't create much wealth, because they only create wealth from companies that make things. And so you got to make things here. Right. So we have been working with the school systems especially the community colleges and many of the high schools and the optics program at MCC and with the Optical Society and FAME, the Finger Lakes Advanced Manufacturers Enterprise, to really create this camaraderie of government, educators, and employers, and parents, and kids to really understand where the jobs are and the values that can be created and the careers that are available. And it's a tough job because most of the careers that people at Optimax are engaged in, no one knows about them. And because, what do you see? Fireman, accountant, there's all kinds of other careers and jobs. And as things have gotten technical, to start as a technician and then let your career take you where it's going to go is a real career opportunity, but they're not really talked about in high schools.
No.
And that's why getting in the shop classes and all kinds of things make it so kids don't know how to do things. And so we want kids to know how to do things, how to run a bandsaw, to understand what a half-inch open end wrench is, and if you actually understand what a right-handed screw versus left.
Right.
These types of things are kind of fundamental to being able to function, as future homeowners or future auto owners. And so we've been working to try to get those types of things into the school systems and over the years, and we've, I think, great partners in the community college system, great partners at many of the high schools and school systems in our region.
Good.
And unfortunately, not so with the city school system because they're just so difficult to work with. But we can work out in the fringes, charter schools. Right. I'm on the board of Virtus Charter School.
Beautiful.
And we can make some really real impacts there.
It really strikes me that so I spent 30 years working in public ed as a school social worker, and I watched for that 30 years ascend an entire generation of every kid on for a bachelor's degree. And not every one of them needed to go for a bachelor's degree, and yet you have an assortment of career opportunities that don't require a bachelor's degree, and that could start with you and could continue in some formal education and training. And as you said, it's this whole group of professional possibilities that we just have not been talking to kids about.
We have employees at Optimax, many employees at Mac that are doing extraordinarily well career-wise, and I'm not just at Optimax, others, and they started with either an apprenticeship or part of an associate's degree or an associate's degree, and they built a whole career around that. Myself and my partner, Rick Plimpton, both of us, our first entry to college was just, we went to both to, Rick went to FLCC and got an associate's degree. I went to MCC and got an associate's degree. So we started our careers with associate's degrees. Right. And that doesn't mean that once you get it, you're done. Just like if you get an apprenticeship in electrical or machining and you're done, I mean, you got a whole lifetime of career. You could get your bachelor's degree in philosophy if you want, but the experience that you get in the learning that comes along with actually doing and making stuff and working with people really sets you up to establish your career. We have people that we've hired right from high school. They've had a paycheck all the time that they've been going into adulthood, have earned up to a master's degrees, and never had a college loan. Company paid more than 50% of the tuition. I mean, you can do things like that. It just takes a little longer rather than getting it done in master's degrees in 6 years. Maybe it takes you 9 years. But these things can be done, and they're way more powerful and capable than someone that went to school for 6 years and then got out into the working world and industry. I mean,
and had no experience on a resume.
Where are you going with that? It's ridiculous. And that's unfortunately that's kind of how we still track some of that. But although I do believe there's an awakening occurring.
Yes.
And so I'd like to think that Optimax and the work that we've done has helped to move some of that along.
Look, I know just from my interaction with the company that it is very clear across the workforce that continuing to grow professionally, educationally is supported, and that the company wants that. And Mike Mandina wants that for his employees. That is a very clear message within your society that you've created, that it didn't have to happen, all happen before they get to you. And I love hearing that, because I think in some other corners of the educational world, part of the narrative is you better get that college degree right after high school. You better get it done. If you don't get it done, you're going to be behind the rest of your life. And there's not a shred of evidence to support that narrative, but it has sent a lot of people off for bachelor's degrees who maybe had aptitudes elsewhere, or needed to maybe grow up a little bit or mature a little bit, get a little work under their belt. So, yeah.
We have plenty of technicians at Optimax that have bachelor's degrees, but it wasn't nothing to do with optics manufacturing.
Yeah, right. So let's finish with this. If somebody is listening and they are maybe where you were 20 some odd years ago when you got this whole thing started, they envision themselves as a bit entrepreneurial, want to build something, a couple of words of wisdom from somebody who has been at this for a really long time.
I think it's good to have passion about what it is you're doing, and just because other people aren't doing it that way, I think I tried too long to try to do what didn't feel right, but was being what was other people were doing. And I think it's okay to be renegade, and to try some stuff that's different. As a matter of fact, I think it's better because that's how you learn stuff. If you're following someone else's formula, then chances are other people are following it too. And this is to get back to Michael Porter. You can't differentiate yourself if you're just doing what everyone else is doing.
Right.
Okay, and that's a race to the bottom.
Right.
So you have to do it differently. And if you can figure out ways to do that, and God knows there's an infinite number of ways to do whatever you're doing differently, then do that. Give it a try. Yeah. But you just got to be passionate about it, and don't give up on the first first go. Right.
So this has probably been said to you before, but I'll say it as someone, again, who's had the privilege of being a part of your company. And this has come to the fore as you have moved towards retirement. When people talk about you at company meetings and thinking about you not being at company meetings, I don't get a sense that anybody is worried that there won't be somebody else who can get up there and talk about the technical stuff. But what I've been hearing over the last year or so is who's going to be the next Mike? And that's not about your technical know-how. That's the person who is passionate. That's the person who loves his workforce. That's the person who views this as a society. That's the person who understands that the more you focus on relationship, there is a return on investment for that from the business end. And it'll be interesting, as someone who kind of walks on the periphery of your company, to see who that might be, because you did it in your authentic way, and that clearly resonated with your workforce.
Yeah. So the question is, who's going to hold the space?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And what I believe is that as long as I'm holding the space, no one else will hold the space.
Right.
And so I have to vacate.
Yeah.
In order to see who's going to hold the space.
Right. Who walks in next?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of strange for me.
I bet.
But we have such great people, and and I don't know how it's going to get held exactly, but it's going to get held. Yeah. And we'll see how that plays itself out.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Mike Mandina, thank you so much for being here with me today.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Helping Conversation. I hope you found today's discussion helpful and insightful. And for those of you who are out there and maybe thinking about how to bring a helping conversation to the business side of things, I think you heard some really good stuff today. I hope you're with us the next time and sit in with us as we continue the discussion and the exploration of the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation. Have a great day.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the Helping Conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation.